All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. We're thrilled today to have Ashley Goodrich with us here to talk about injury. But before we get rolling, I wanted just to point everyone to our website, and the I think we're at 38 webinars now in the last 12 months. So we're getting our numbers up, and some really cool resources there on the website at the School of Education, Sport Coaching Leadership at Drexel. Nairi Darian did a three-part series towards the end of last year on nutrition. Ellen Starowski back in June talked to us about the changes for women in the coaching profession. So there are a couple of examples of what we've got up on the website. And in the coming weeks, we're going to do an athlete leadership development workshop, looking at how to develop that leadership within your sport group. So that's forthcoming. And then next week we're talking to Dan Freeman about the value of sport, and he's going to talk about some of the changes that we're seeing. And then we're going to follow up with a couple of webinars in March looking at sports specialization and also the impact on youth sport, and the difference that's making. So I'm thrilled, Ashley, to have you with us to talk about injury prevention and improving athlete performance, and specifically to talk about risk management and all the cool things that you're doing. So welcome, and thrilled that you could join us.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, really excited. I think one of the main topics that has obviously emerged since COVID, reared its ugly head a year ago is really assessing the risk management situation for not only an individual sport club, but, how it impacts an organization, coast to coast. And so those are a lot of the questions we're answering. I think historically prior to this, a lot of people assumed risk management just kind of stood with your SafeSport training, your CDC, any state mandated education. And what we're realizing is that it really boils down to that's the bare minimum. We want people to have an understanding of injury prevention, the appropriate background screen, what mental health does at an overall impact, academics, testing, college prep. If you're a high performance athlete, what that does, what happens when you age out or you retire, and then lastly, how do you utilize data that is aggregated through all of these various mediums? How do you use this to implement new education, new tactics, new procedures, and then also, really get individuals retaining in sport? How do you keep them enthused so it becomes a lifelong passion? So really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, why don't we sort of go back a year, and how about you just tell us a little bit about what you guys were doing in terms of helping organizations understand what was going on with their athletes as it relates to injury, and then we can sort of dive into the sort of COVID, the new world that we're living in now with COVID. So how about you just give us a bit of a scoop on all of that?
Yep. So I would say a year ago, a lot of people would just simply engage with us when they had to report an incident. So that could be through an athletic trainer, it could be through a coach, it could be simply saying, I have an injury, I just need to make sure that my child, my athlete, they're either cleared or not. Nobody analyzed anything about if a child is removed from play for a serious injury, what that does mentally, what the return to play process looks like. Today, return to play, not only includes injury prevention, recovery, stability, maintenance, if you will, but then it also, now that an injury could be mental injury, it could be a nutrition fatigue.
Yeah.
So I think really kind of just getting an understanding of what an athlete's needs are is a really good place to begin.
Yeah, and so in that vein, as we've moved across the threshold of really understanding what the COVID pandemic has done, what are some of the things that you've been doing to help administrators and coaches track what's going on with athletes in terms of what they're doing at home in terms of their training, but specifically relating to monitoring what's happening with COVID?
So I think in the past, most coaches, they did their registration process through whatever system they had, and they did their state mandated requirements of, I have to do this. What we found is that a lot of organizations are, you were not being paid unless you were actively engaging. So you have to now create a practice plan. You might have to ask them, what does your sitting on the couch time look like? What does your training look like outside of just my actual in-person view? So a lot of it came down to you have to become actively engaged, almost as if you're a teacher. So it's revamping that mindset of education, how you're impacting a sport down to an individual, and then really kind of saying, I have all access to this training through, if it's USU soccer or through its US rowing, any of your NGBs, they all have auxiliary education. How do you use that as a means of getting engaged further? And then if we have an integration with that system, how do we make sure that it's tracked? A lot of times you just do it on an anniversary date.
Yep.
Maybe it's really looking at, do you roll them out systemically? So that way you take one piece, you take a break, you digest it, what have you, you apply it, moving on. So really getting an understanding of how are you engaging, electronically, in person, and then really applying it.
Yeah. I think one of the big challenges we're all facing is just the overload of data. There's just such an enormous amount of information that we can collect. And I think one of the things that we talk a lot about, particularly with the use of technology, is how do we use that data to make better decisions, whether it's for coaches, for administrators, even for athletes. What are some of the things that you're seeing as a way to overcome the enormous amount of data that we can collect, so that people can sift through the noise and figure out, okay, what is important to pay attention to, and how that can actually help improve performance over time?
One big thing is understanding your athlete, understanding the age of your athlete, the nutrition. There's a lot of things that people don't assume, or they may not even apply, if you will, to, okay, the athlete's here. Now they're mine. And so I think a lot of times we don't analyze enough what happens before practice or before a competition. And so what that does as a result of performance, as a performance of mental fatigue. And so it's really getting to know your athletes, getting to know their tendencies, and then being able to establish a behavior change. So using the data appropriately. So it's going to take a little bit more effort to get involved, but basically you'll be having a better adoption rate. Your athletes will perform better because they know that there's a true buy-in. And then, I think a lot of the things that people are now recognizing is, did I not warm them up appropriately? Or what, is their sedentary life, or is their life so involved in a computer that maybe they're just not visually attuned with what's going on and they can't focus? And so it's really just using your visual cues, what you're learning at every varying level, and then basically applying a behavior change.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, just in terms of the pivot and the adjustment that we've all had to make. That even with the best planned practice, with the best laid intentions for and goals for a season, so many of us have had to pivot on in the moment and try and figure out, okay, how do we adjust to what's going on? And as you say, literally looking at the group that's in front of you and figuring out, okay, now how do I adjust? How do I respond to what's happening? And I think that's seen out of the last World Series, the last game, where analytics have become such an important part of coaching, part of decision making, that there's still that instinct of, okay, what do they need right now? And so how are you working with with those that you're in contact with to sort of balance that idea of the data saying one thing but instinct says something else? I think in much of the discussion we have is, when the data supports what we're thinking, it's fine. When the data agrees that things aren't great, but when there's that false positive, or there's that conflict between the data and your instinct, what are you how are you guys managing that in the context of the organizations you're working with?
So a good example of that is we had a soccer club out of Florida participate in a competition. Within the first 10 days, they had 9 girls below their ACL. One of the questions that we often you say is, oh, what happened? I tore my ACL. Well, when did it happen? Digging deeper into that of, did it happen in practice? Did it happen in a warm up? Did it happen in the first period? Whatever. getting an understanding of, are you not warm? What did you do? So the data is there, but it's more so getting an understanding of when it's speaking to you, rather than just generalizing, is a big piece in adoption. And also, getting an understanding of this is a problem. And so also, I think, it comes down to, how do you get the parents engaged? How do you use this as a total package opportunity? I think a lot of parents just drop their kids off. They know what's occurring. They trust the coach, but this really gets into the whole retention, the burnout. Are you really mentally, physically, emotionally prepared for what's about to happen?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of really interesting pieces to that. One is, just the broader context of what's happening for our athletes at all levels, particularly the youth level. And you mentioned the role of the parents. I think one of the big challenges that a lot of coaches are facing right now is how to talk to parents,
Mhm.
how to sort of give them enough information where they're not drawing them in as another coach, but they're also not leaving information out so the parent feels like they're very distant. So I'm curious about what you're saying, in terms of that balance between how can coaches and administrators give, access to the parents so they feel engaged, but not to the point where they're, overstepping the mark.
Something to note, and we've heard this a lot, is almost establishing those boundaries, saying, here's where I need you, and here's where, your influence plays a pivotal part, such as, a parent meeting. I think when you go into these parent meetings, the coach can do everything they can to prepare a child for a life in a college setting. They can get those coaches on the call. They can basically say, I am your recruiting conduit. But a parent is the person who's in that home every day. Did you get your ACT, your SAT prep? Did you do all
Mm-hmm.
these things? That's the back end, the behind the scenes that the coaches, they're not in their home. What does your nutrition look like? They are also doing a check of, I only see your kid or our high performance athlete X amount of hours a day. You know, I can't watch you. What does your mental stress level look like? And so I think it's a good back and forth, but it also establishes some healthy boundaries and expectations on either end of, here's where I can manage this role, but here's where I need some support.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess the other side of that also, for a lot of parents, they it is a time where they could sort of just say, okay, off you go and
Mhm.
play, and I think the demands on parents prior to COVID, we all knew were high, but I think for a lot of parents that haven't been able to, have had to just multitask the entire way through this COVID thing, has been, something that beyond anyone's expectations. And I think that one element that you mentioned, in terms of drawing that boundary for coaches, but really to keep parents as engaged as possible, that their extra set of eyes are really important to know, particularly on the mental health side. I think that's something that I'd love to hear your thoughts about, because that inevitably is a part of this conversation that it continues to grow, and we're seeing organizations, basically bolstering their resources, looking at different ways to support the mental health of athletes at all the levels, from the youth sport level, collegiate level, and even at the high performance level. Those stresses are like we've never seen before. So, what are you seeing on that side, on that front? In the mental health and mental wellness side of athlete care.
We are actively engaging in relationships that, offer a fluid transition. So development stage to, let's say, high performance or collegiate, however you want to categorize it. I think one big thing for us is identifying a partner that everyone can relate to. So, if you engage with it at a younger level of, just tell me how you feel,
Yeah.
at the age of 7, 8, I just want to go with my friends. Whereas when you get into high school, it's, I'm confident in my ability to say, I'm anxious about a test. I have SAT prep, or, I have a major college scout coming to my game today, or my game just got canceled because of COVID and I'm supposed to go out for pregame in 5 minutes. That is a very real differentiator. And then you get into high performance where my salary, my contract is contingent on my performance. And then, you get into that conversation later where you say, I'm done. It's time to retire. And then you go through an identity crisis or what do I do next? This has been my entire life. For anybody that's been an athlete, you all have those trajectories, if you will. It's really just, talking about it, being able to vocalize it, and then knowing that you have a resource. So that is something, as we align with certain partners, we really say, we don't want a boundary on an age. We really want to know that you can apply. So as an athlete progresses through this spectrum, they're constantly engaged with you and we don't have to teach them anything else.
Yeah. And I think that it also opens up that question of how, the balance of how much data is too much data, how much, interaction becomes sort of paralysis by analysis. So I'm curious just how you guys are monitoring that sense of when is there too much information? How do we balance that access to, the wearables, the other data, so that doesn't become overwhelming and sort of it spoils the fun, I suppose.
Yeah. I think one thing that people need to recognize is if you have too much data, you'll turn it off. It's kind of like when you get a sponsored content and you think, I don't want sponsored content. I want, real, live, intuitive content that's tailored to me. As a sport administrator, you need to be able to recognize who needs to see what. It's no different than, you go into an ER and they, or a triage center and you say, I have this, you don't want 60 doctors. You want to be able to see someone who sees a progressive, here's how I can apply it. And so I think, when you roll out these metrics of mental health, it's, something that people, just like you have a recruiting coordinator, you might want to have some sort of mental health professional. It doesn't have to be on call, but someone who can evaluate the terms of, this is what's happening at this age level. Here's some, stressors. And then, basically being able to say, this could lead to this could impact this. What's really nice about this partner that we are looking to align with is based upon your age or the information that you put in the system, it then aggregates a response. So someone who's doing fine, that's fantastic. Keep going. You're cleared for the day, right? Whereas someone who might need a little bit more hands-on, here's an automatic resource that lands in your inbox. If you'd like to talk to someone, we're here to help. Or as someone who might be considered a high-risk patient, basically, here's the resources for the next 5 minutes, but help is on the way. So it's really just getting an understanding of not overwhelming, but providing enough resources so that way the person can basically overcome and adapt in the short term with a long-term solution.
Sure. What about my favorite question that came in earlier? What about protecting your star athlete? What about that pearl that you have that you want to wrap them up in cotton wool because on game day they're the difference between you winning and losing. What are your what's your sageful advice on that one?
Ooh, we've all been on that team where you have the star athlete and you might not be that person. I think you're as good as your weakest link, and you can only go as far as your strongest link is willing to lead. So, something we always talk to people about is you have to train everyone equivalently. You can't provide favoritism. You can't do that. You also can't protect your star athlete because they are afraid to take risks if they feel like they're in a constant bubble. So, it's really just letting them play, letting them learn their limits. And I oftentimes think when your star athlete elevates their level of play, they naturally elevate the team around them.
Yeah, no, that I think it's a great piece of advice. And I think, with one of the elements that we're looking at now, in terms of the long-term athlete development with some of our older athletes. I'm wondering if you have any experience with your older adult athlete that thinks they can do a lot more, but they just can't handle it.
I actually, truth be told, just had this experience with myself. I am by no means a high performance athlete, but I still participate as if I'm training for playing college softball. Sometimes the littlest thing can humble you and you recognize I need to adjust, but I also need to listen to my body. I had my back seize up on me last week, and it's because my hip slipped out of alignment. And what I thought was the end of the world was basically a 7-day setback, but I basically had the option of exercising the tools around me. Just because it's over does not mean that it's over for the long term. And so really getting an understanding of listening to your body, understanding your resources, but also where are your weaknesses? That's the big thing that we oftentimes hear of. Oh, you're injured here, but that's a referred pain. Your actual weakness is here. And so it kind of goes back hand in hand with your leadership piece of,
Yeah.
Your leader should also be an advocate for maybe your weakest link.
Yeah, certainly the the balance of training versus recovery is a huge one, and I'm curious just in terms of your the feedback mechanisms that you're seeing. So much of what we're doing right now is online. Um, is that something you're seeing a major migration online, or are you still seeing sort of the traditional, hey, let's go back to basics of let's just have a conversation and see where you're at?
In regards to recovery, I think a lot of people are getting, into more, I don't want to call it modern pieces, but a lot of people are like, let's carry a foam roller. You'd be
Yeah,
surprised what a foam roller can do. As simple as it sounds, we're seeing a lot of sports that will say, when you have conversations with an athletic trainer, they'll say, did you foam roll? Did you do stretching with a band? They're getting outside the standard. You should do lunges, or you should do like a quick jog around the complex. People are really starting to apply what they've learned in a lot of their courses, and they're basically saying, I can use this as a preventative and as a maintenance tool.
yeah, yeah, and I think that's it's again another really good example of just the real fine balance between where we're at with with the data, where we're at with technology, but also a return to the real fundamentals of what we're trying to do. In terms of the bigger picture here of sporting organizations. Are you able to sort of give us a bit of a sense of what's the one priority that organizations should be looking at prioritizing right now when it comes to athlete performance?
I think it's having a clear understanding of return to play.
Yeah.
Return to play is big. Not everybody, and it doesn't have to pertain to COVID. Return to play could simply be getting return to practice.
Yep.
Where we live in California, you can't compete, but you can practice. So you need to be prepared for practice. In Texas, other states, Florida, you can full on practice, compete. You can travel. There's no limitation. So it's really understanding, do you want to stay local? Do you want to travel? Like knowing exactly what your club is capable of. But then also having that wherewithal of, if you do travel, for instance, if you leave California and you come back, you essentially have to quarantine.
Yeah.
Are you prepared to tell your athletes you now have to stay home for 14 days after you went to Arizona? So it's having those realistic conversations of, what is return to play? What is a possible repercussion? What is your exposure? If you do go to play, what if you get injured?
Yeah. And I think one of the big things that's come up is just the interaction that organizations are having with insurance. And I know that's some of the work that you're able to connect, the day-to-day athlete monitoring all the way through to insurance. And I think for a lot of certainly administrators and executive directors that are looking at their organizations right now thinking, okay, how do we keep this thing moving forward? What are some of the things that you're seeing on the insurance side of how to protect organizations, but also make sure that they're not opening themselves to being vulnerable?
Something to note is have an understanding of what you're actually paying for. I think a lot of people use their insurance piece as a secondary policy. And so I think if you don't know what you're paying for, you don't know what your coverage is. With a lot of membership organizations, you get that liability coverage, but that doesn't always go very far, but it only covers you maybe at your facility. So getting a true understanding of what your benefits include, and then also getting an understanding of, if my primary insurance covers the initial report, what does this secondary policy cover? So my out-of-pocket expenses are reduced even further. And then lastly, as an organization, if you have several claims versus no claims, shouldn't you be rewarded for being a responsible person for education, injury documentation, basically mitigating all of those factors that by avoidance, you should be held liable. And so something that we've really we worked on it with USA Youth and High School Rugby of, are you really getting what you need? And are you overpaying? Because if you are overpaying, we all know that those expenses then matriculate down to the registration fees. And you're basically then creating a less inclusive environment. Your retention rates are down or what have you. But I think that's the one thing I would stress to each individual is get an understanding of what you're paying for. If they are increased, what is the increase? And, are you getting better service?
Yeah, and I think that definitely fits with a number of stories that I've heard of late of really going back and knowing what the agreement you're in, and it is a point of shopping around, because I think there are a lot of changes, there are a lot of things that what's the worst piece of advice? Oh, this is the way we've always done it. I think that is certainly something that right now it certainly doesn't meet, it doesn't fit. So you touched on a little bit there on education, and I know you're doing a lot, obviously, in the program that we're running here, particularly the masters level. Looking at how coaches can stay current, and that, I think, for all of us, again, there's that balance of, okay, what do I need to know? And then when I open the Pandora's box of everything that's out there, it is quite overwhelming. So what are you doing in terms of sort of helping educate coaches so that they keep a narrow focus of athlete performance, but also not, digging their head in the sand and not paying attention to what's really going on?
I think the key thing is to differentiate between what is mandated versus what is suggested. That's something that we oftentimes ask of, what is required of your registration through your sport and your state, because that should just be your bare minimum, if you will. And then, we oftentimes look at what are some pieces that go outside that scope. So you might have to do your concussion education, your heat and illness, but did you know that there is basic training similar to a mandated reporter in a school system? You're a mandated reporter yourself. Are you able to identify some triggers? Are you identifying, areas of need, of concern? Another one of our partners, they have an infectious and communicable disease option that came out as a result of COVID. What if there's exposure? Instead of Googling everything, we all know how that works. Basically, if you go into it as a preventative or as a I am prepared, you're able to troubleshoot things a heck of a lot quicker and triage your situation rather than being reactive.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the big questions we have for a lot of organizations is, do you have a plan? Who is the point of contact? And for those that are on the call that either have a plan or they know it needs to be reviewed or updated, what are some of the recommendations that you have for how to do that in a sort of with a level of frequency to stay up to date?
I oftentimes tell people your sport organization should be run just like a business. This should not be a nonchalant thing. This is a business. How would you conduct yourself in your professional atmosphere, your professional environment, if you didn't know? How would you feel if you were not trained appropriately, if you did not know your emergency action plan, if you didn't have a risk management policy for perhaps an active shooter, for a natural disaster? You can't go into this thinking this is just a part-time thing, because your job does not end when you leave the field. And so I think a lot of it is based upon your user role within your organization, you should have an understanding of what your responsibilities are. If you are a parent, your responsibilities for your children, maybe your neighbor's kids, however, whatever it is. As a coach, you might be responsible for the 12 to 20 kids on your team, but you could also be serving as a manager for another. So having an understanding of your role, really treating your organization like a business and not as a pastime is key, because then it really sets the standard for this is the expectation.
Sure. I think that it sort of begs the next question of, while, some organizations may do a really good job of keeping, their protocols up to date. How do you know, when there is, it won't go as far as to say an emergency, but when protocols have to be put in play, um, what kind of, what kind of protections organizations, in the sport world are putting into place, whether it's a simulation, whether it's, free, different types of, mock events that sort of walk through the process. I think we're all at a point where these devices have certainly not given us more time, but made us probably busier than ever. But yeah, in terms of that, going through the actual protocols and testing things out, what are you seeing, organizations are doing to sort of make sure that they are ready no matter what gets thrown at them?
The one thing that people are doing is asking for two emergency contacts. I think in the past, historically, people just list one, regardless. So having two. The other thing is people are inundated with data or information communication every day. So asking people, what is the best form of communication that resonates with you? Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a text, maybe it's a phone call. I don't know. Personally, I prefer a text or notification over an email because I get several emails a day. Um,
Yeah.
so, but I think it's also, if you prefer an email, make sure your filters are set so it does not block that email, because you don't ever want to say, I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just really listening to your user base. And then, if you do have a facility, or if you do have, that's part of your communication, your handbook, whatever, every club has it. Um, this should be start part of your standard protocol. If you're going to be in our organization, here's our policy. Here's what we view as top line priority for this situation. If you have experience in something else, your parents are oftentimes an amazing resource for you, and they think of things that maybe you just haven't yet. And so getting an understanding of how they want to be communicated with, basically telling them these are our protocols if you want to be a part of it, and then also asking for feedback.
Mm. Yeah, I think certainly, setting expectations and then gaining buy-in is such a critical piece. I think, it's a standard question, but it's probably the most difficult question that we're faced with right now, is where are we headed? I
Mhm.
think the hope is that this COVID thing will go away eventually, but everything from, as soon as everyone gets the vaccine, everything will be fine, through to, this may be around for a number of, continue to impact the way we conduct ourselves. Maybe not in completely in the sport realm, but based on what you guys are seeing, and I can't not ask the question of where you see things heading. Even if it are, there are trends or issues that you see that will be here to stay. So where are you seeing things heading?
I think for a while, the COVID monitoring, or the documentation of illness, is something that will be with us for a while. Something to also recognize is being transparent about allergies, reactions to things. I think a lot of parents are starting, if they have had their child or someone, especially, an adult or a coach, get vaccinated, they want to document that there was an allergic reaction in
Yeah.
the event that there's a flare up for a second. Parents are now starting to take into account that their child has a peanut allergy, and they're documenting it in their incident reporting, because, as we all know, everybody's responsible for a role. Parents oftentimes have to bring a snack after the game. There's nothing worse than isolating a kid because their parent didn't say you can't have this. And so I think people are just becoming more transparent with what they know in regards to their children, their family. And then, it's a lot easier to say, I'm not alone in this, or I have a solution, when you vocalize, I had a reaction, I had an exposure.
Yeah. And I think that if there's one good thing that may come of all this, that we do get closer to each other, and understand that there are a lot of things going on for all of us. And I think that, yeah, I've done some work over the last year on of care in coaching. What does it look like to be, to be thoughtful in that way, to really be, to be mindful of what is going on, and that question that, how are you is maybe the most important question a coach can ask, that they're not only listening with their ears, but they're looking with their eyes to say, yeah, so what they're saying, does that match with their behavior, the athlete and the player's behavior? Because I think that element of, what really is going on, and you've touched on it as well, just the mental side, that it's not only the physical demands that are going on, but how many, even in the class setting, how many classes we've been in recently where the majority of the class is spent just talking about how people are managing everything that's going on, and that technology perhaps has been able to connect us, but we still need to take time to really be with each other, which I think is it's a fascinating point. I'm curious about how you guys are managing that, being an online organization at Injury Free, and just sort of keeping things moving and keeping people connected.
We oftentimes don't turn our cameras on when we have Zoom. And it's kind of something like, you hear a lot of people's voice, but what we've been able to decipher is your tone sounds off. What's wrong? So it's almost as if you've eliminated a sense, and basically you're having to heighten another one. And so that's something that we are starting to learn of: tone, what you look like when you do turn on your camera. Are you happy? Do you seem distracted? And then oftentimes that one-to-one contact of, are you okay? Like that's a very normal question. And I don't think people are as afraid to be vulnerable anymore. And I think people welcome that conversation. And so personally for us, I think I'm having 7 to 8 Zoom calls a day. And I think the number one question that I love to ask people is, tell me about your family. Like, they want to talk about, basically what makes them the happiest every day and what they're thankful for. And I think it really just gives people a sense of, you're not just a tech company, you actually care. And, remembering those points of like, I heard you were sick, tell me how I can help you.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that comes to mind is we've sort of lost that ability to have the water cooler conversation, that sort of impromptu, informal, hi, how you going? And I think what you're touching on is exactly the missing piece, that we do need to sort of factor that in, whether it's organized or otherwise, but to really just take a step back and to be able to look at what really is most important. So, and I think that again that is the heart of this discussion of injury prevention, that if we focus on the athlete, we focus on all the things going on, that the sport will be the vehicle to wherever we end up, whether it's all the way to the top of the mountain, Olympics, national championship, whatever, or just, hey, we just had another good day out and reminded why we love the sports that we're involved with. So yeah, I mean, a final question. Anything else, before we'll hand it over, if there are any other questions from folks online, but anything else that you want to wrap things up with there, Ashley?
Something that we've really recognized is hinging on the athlete, the parent buy-in, is really getting an understanding of where your good, true coaches come from. Something that we've really recognized is, in this moment of need, there's been an increase in incidents of domestic violence. There's been a lot of things that people don't want to talk about. And so something that we've really stressed to organizations is, do you know your coaches? You want to know your athletes, but do you really know your coaches? And that has been, a really big trigger for us of, you have an influx of coaches that come from another state. Are they who they say they are? Are they really here for that intrinsic reason? And so, we talk a lot about, knowing your athlete. You got to know who's a major factor or an influencer in that athlete's life. And they're not, they're doing everything appropriately, correctly. Because that's another retention factor. That's, I think a lot of times in the past, we've always said, oh, I just got burnout, or, was that really burnout? Did something else happen? So it's really creating that full risk management. I got you. Nobody slips through the cracks. I didn't know situation. It's more so, we are here to move sport. We're here to make it better. We're here to improve the experience. So you're a lifelong athlete rather than just, a period in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's another really good point of because the comment that we continue to hear is there's not enough coaches, there are not enough qualified coaches. So I think there are many organizations that literally will just try and take the best person they can, but
Right.
to really do that due diligence. And one of the things that I think a lot of the top organizations really do is they think about their succession plan, and they think about how to describe what it is that they're really looking for. And I know that gets that there is that risk of compromise of, oh well, we've got to find somebody, and maybe even more so on the volunteer side than it is on the fully paid top of the line type of full-time jobs. But yeah, the volunteer space is an important one. Yeah, what are you seeing in terms of the way, in the way that organizations are doing their due diligence in terms of, getting to know their coaches and preparing them so they're not put in positions where they are where they are put in situations where they can be successful?
Something that I think is really crucial is providing your coaches with the tools to be successful. So, getting an understanding of what's your intention when you come in versus what's your goal. Do you just want to be a parent coach? Do you want to be a volunteer? Like, that's fantastic. But I don't want to stretch you where you feel like you're underprepared or you're underwhelmed or overwhelmed, if you will. There's something about, I can coach a kindergartner in soccer, but if you ask me to fill in for your 15 development team, no.
Yeah.
The answer is no, so really, similar to how you prevent athlete burnout, or you're attempting to, like, don't burn out your coaches, providing them with resources, giving them, constant feedback, constructive feedback, and then rewarding them. You don't always have to, compensation is, very generous and very nice, but some coaches simply say, I want to go take an education course and I can't afford it.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many coaches would rather have access to education than perhaps a raise, because either way, they're going to have to pay for it. So, kind of setting that expectation, having that idea of, here's my player pathway. Well, here's my coaching pathway. Maybe I want to be a referee. How do I, cross paths? How do I create healthy pathways for everybody involved, where you can become a pivotal leader in our organization?
Yeah. And I think that speaks to, just the very motivation that, while a goal and an outcome of a particular end of a season or an achievement is one thing, the ultimate measure of success is, are we progressing, are we improving? And
Mhm.
that's certainly the case for in the athlete world, but also the case for coaches. We feel like we're progressing. That it sort of puts water on the garden. It fuels us. But if we don't feel like we're getting better, it certainly is the difference. So, well, awesome, Ashley. I think this has been a fabulous uh, a look into what you're doing with Injure Free. And I think anything that you want to wrap up with, to, if people want to find out more about what you're doing, the data that you're collecting, and some of the really cool insights. Anything else you want to close out with?
Yeah, I'll just give a quick share screen of basically some information that we've been able to compile through a variety of, incident reports, if you will. This is through U.S. Youth Soccer. So this is all de-identified information. So this is basically information that, as they document their injuries at all of their events, they then get this information. So they have a comparison of male to female. They have an idea of what's occurring. I'm going to try and minimize this, at each age. So as you can see, their heightened injuries occur at 15 and 17. I don't have a gender breakdown, but I would say that that's likely has to do with concussions. In US Youth Soccer, there is a rule that you cannot head a soccer ball before the age of 12. But I'm curious, like, how some of this information that they've collected through a custom question, through discussions they're having with athletes, through athletic trainers, what they're doing to impact change through education. But also, this is really good information to have if anyone is looking to evaluate a facility, evaluate what the facility offers. Is it turf? Is it grass? This is really good. But also, turning it on the flip side, if you're an organization that maybe has more injuries. I hate to call it out, Overland Park, where my family lives and where I quasi call home. This is in Kansas City. I've been to this facility. It's beautiful. But what's happening for an organization that maybe if this were not a soccer facility, but if this were an organization that has several injuries, maybe this is your chance to advocate for grant funding. Maybe you dig a little deeper into the data. Contusions, that's a bruise, but you basically, you want to find someone who can accurately report the information. So if you have an athletic trainer, if you have a physician, if you have anybody that's associated with your sport, you can use this data to your leverage as a means of getting an understanding of what's happening in your sport to make it healthy. Here, this is basically a timeline. Here's an event recap. So similar to what your guys are all doing, independently within your sport, you also want to be able to say that your tournaments are healthy as well. And I think it really gives a good testament to who your staff is, what your protocols, your risk management, who you're aligned with on a medical side. And so it's really it's insightful information, and it's a really good learning tool.
Yeah. I think that the deep dive into the who and the what and the where, is certainly educational, but also it identifies, it goes beyond the anecdotes, and we think this is happening, but we can start to draw connections to, like you said. I mean, I think the warm up is probably one of the most underrated and critical aspects of what we do, but it comes back to planning. If there's no time to plan, then we just get out there and get it done. And then, you blow the whistle and everyone goes home, and there's no time to evaluate to then inform the planning for the next session, the next day, the next whatever. So just those basic principles of planning, evaluation, and communication, I think are really, really great takeaways, Ashley. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I every time we get together, I always learn something new that sort of, either reminds me of stuff that we know and we know we should be doing, or or what I think you guys are doing is really pushing this conversation in the right direction, both from a micro perspective of what's happening on a day-to-day basis, all the way through to integration of technology and bringing all the players around the table, both on and off the field. So I really appreciate the time today, and we'll keep in touch for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Cam. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to talk about, how we can help, I'm happy to do so. We're not a super salesy company. We try to learn how we can help. It's not a one size fits all. So please feel free to share my contact info. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to serve as a resource too. You don't have to be a client of ours for us to, be a sounding board. So thanks again.
Awesome.